Welcome to Our Black Gay Diaspora podcast. I am your host, Erick. For this episode, I am joined by Niki Lopez, an Afro-Latina interdisciplinary visual artist, curator, and social practitioner. Niki is the founder of What's Your Elephant, a quote, charitable arts and educational organization dedicated to catalyzing awareness and fostering vital dialogue around under-addressed topics, end quote. She's also on the advisory council at Women in Network, one of the oldest lesbian organizations in Florida, and she is the host of the Circle podcast. Niki's awards and honors include being the recipient of the 2020 Broward County Arts and Culture Visionaries Award from ArtServe, the 2021 Kennedy Center's Citizen Artist Fellowship nomination, and a 2023 Women's History Month honoree by the Broward County Commission on the Status of Women. I should have asked you if I'm saying that name correctly.
It's Broward.
Broward, okay, thank you. Niki is a Renaissance person who is doing her part to make the world a more inclusive and honest and colorful place. And I look forward to learning more about who she is and how she's thriving as a Black queer professional. Hey, Niki, and welcome. How are you?
I'm doing great. I'm honored and glad to be on here. I feel like I've seen some of your journey from like some of the earlier podcasts to now. And I'm just, I'm happy to be here. I love what you do. And, I'm feeling good.
Good to hear you're well. And same here. I think I started following you when I first started the podcast. So when we were able to connect about a month or so ago, I was like, yes. Because, I've definitely learned a lot from your journey, what you share on social media and what you're doing. And even your videos with the swimming, I was like, that's cool. I was always telling myself, like, I know how to swim, but I do need a few reminders. So, seeing those videos always inspired me to get back out there.
I'm a part of a group, Diversity in Aquatics, which, because I seem to not be able to have a hobby without have some type of advocacy connected to it. But it's empowering Black and brown people to reconnect to the water and get connected to the water. I'm an adult, learn to swim. And I also deal with some anxiety, like mental health things around water. So I love it. And it's also challenging. Like growth is like up and down. And I was like going on a steady path. First of all, some of the people who know me, they're like, wait a minute, you're in the water? Because literally 5 years ago, I was definitely having a panic attack at a lazy river while children were passing by. People who deal with challenges, like I'm still not comfortable in deep water. I still have like my ups and downs where I have to remind myself, I could swim. Why am I panicking right now? Let me breathe. It has so many benefits, spiritually, physically, mentally, emotionally.
Thank you for that, because my concern or my fear, to be honest, my fear is, being in deep water. And my thing is I did learn how to swim like on top, but I never got comfortable with treading water.
I started learning to swim because a friend at the time, she introduced me to a group, Diversity in Aquatics, trauma-informed, anxiety-sensitive, adult learn to swim. It's still important for us to get in there and find people in our community that could help. There's always people, Soul Cap, they're out of London because swimming is still very much a white sport. There's a lot of stigmas around Black people can't swim. And we were the original swimmers. We were diving 90 feet to get oysters with no equipment, the pearls.
You said something about like whatever you're doing, there's always advocacy. Do you find that that's just a natural trait for somebody who is like a visionary like you or a creative?
I think so. It's just what attracted me and connected me to that group. It was Diversity in Aquatics. And I love that it was not just addressing learning to swim, but also addressing connecting us back to the water, the injustice of disconnecting us from the water, right? I had no idea at the time the wait-ins was before the civil rights movement. It actually led to the civil rights movement when Black people were trying to get access to the water, because there was a time, especially like in Florida, where Black people could go to the beach to clean white people's homes, but they couldn't enjoy the beach themselves. And they had to protest and fight and go in. They had Martin Luther King come down because he was a swimmer. I've always been interested in the things that people don't want to talk about. Even before doing What's Your Elephant, I've always been an educator of sorts, or sharing, or just wanting to push the boundaries, questioning, the norms, even within our own communities. we have within our LGBT communities, we tell people, respect us for who we are, right? If I say I'm gay, a lesbian, whatever, trans, that's who I am and that's how you should address me. But then within our own dynamic, we have these heteronormative boxes, or, oh, if you're a femme lesbian, you have to be this way, that way. So it's just something within my nature, like a social justice rebel. I feel those of us who are courageous enough or who have the capacity to act with courage and put ourselves out there, we also have kind of a sense of responsibility to do our fair share. And, you know, our fair share is a lot more than many people's fair share, hoping to get people to motivate to do something like, oh, if she could do these things, I could do this. Or like, oh, wait, I thought I could only help if I have money, but I don't have money to give, but I have time. I have a skill set. The name Nicole actually means for the people. So I think it's just a part of me. When you've gone through different things, it makes you more open and more empathetic. When I talk to people, I say, you know, I'm under everything under the umbrella of creative advocacy. Also because I'm into mental health and all those things, as some of those are also coming from when you survive things, right? There's something in your nature that kind of clicks to saying, like, if I went through a lot of stuff, I don't want other people to. It kind of helps to foster more of that. I want to do something about it. Like even with my design business, it's a purpose-driven business. Whatever I do, whatever I can do, I want it to be in the capacity of moving the needle forward in any way, creating visibility, creating space for other people.
When you say mental health, I even see that in when you talked about the scrolling, because I can relate to that. When you mention like something says it's diverse, or we have all these streaming platforms for content, and there's this game in my head where I'm just like, nope, nope, nope. For me, it's a challenge because it's like, I need to see myself. I need to see people who look similar to me, who are making a difference. And this is not doing that for me.
Absolutely. And just with the different things I do, sometimes I'm on boards, I'm working with different nonprofits, and you're in on meetings and different things where people are saying, oh, the system isn't right. We want to be a part of the change. We want to fix things. But then they're not really doing the work, or they're missing those things, right? So I do graphic design. And I remember years ago, a lady came to me and she was doing these lesbian parties. Latin lady. It was before she knew I was Afro-Latina, right? So she just thinks she's having a conversation with me, and she brought this up since I was a Black person. And she said, you know, it's so interesting. Black people don't really come to my parties. It's always the same people that come to my parties. And I said, oh, let me see your flyer. And so I said, those are the people you're inviting to your party. You're not inviting Afro-Latinas. You're not inviting, you know, brown skin, dark skin, Black skin. You're not inviting Black women. You're not inviting masculine-centered women. You're not inviting non-binary women. And you're not inviting them because they're not included in your visuals. Thinking outside of the box of not just saying, oh, we're open to all. It should be in your visuals. Diversity should be in your visuals. Or like someone invited me to something. When I looked at another women's only brunch that they had, there was literally 30 women that were all white. If I'm looking at 10 different events and all of those people look the same in all 10, then I feel like you're not really doing anything particular to make sure that I feel accepted, and I'm not going to go somewhere and be tokenized. Whatever we're supporting, we need to make sure that we're researching to make sure where we're spending our money, our time, our attention, what we're sharing on social media, all of those should line up with our values. And if it's not, why are we giving it attention? You know, I love that you're doing this podcast. And when I was doing my podcast, I'm kind of on a break. Instead of people complaining, oh, I don't want all this stuff on the internet and I don't want to see this, I don't want to see that. If you have a cell phone and you're not creating what you want to see, back in the day, we would need lots of money to do the things that we're doing right now that social media allows us to do. We have that privilege of technology, and how are we using it to better society? How are we using it to amplify the things that we feel is important? And I just feel drawn to those things and try to showcase that and share with other people, especially organizations who want to benefit from the credit of looking like they're about diversity and inclusion, about doing the right thing and being on the right side of history or whatever's trending. If you're not a Black organization, what are you doing outside of Black History Month? I don't want to go places and be a part and contribute to things that I feel is not doing what they can to be better human beings.
I remember years ago, a friend, he said, once you know, you can't not know and you can't not see. Like you said, that's when it's like, well, what can I do to change this for the better? I like the way you put, how people advertise things, because I definitely have been invited to things, LGBT things. I sense they're being genuine and when they want to invite me, but I never put it the way you did. When I scanned that brochure, that ad, I'm like, yeah, I don't think so, because I know when I've been in spaces like that, I could feel invisible or just, it doesn't feel emotionally safe for me, mentally safe for me.
You took the time to sit down and program and who you want the DJ to be and what type of food, snacks, whatever have you, but you're not saying, okay, who are we inviting to this thing? If it's only one type of person, but we want all these people, are we properly engaging the different types of people and really saying, okay, who do we want to have here? One of the boards that I'm on is Island City Stage, and it's an LGBT theater group. Their demographic is primarily, white, male, gay people. I'm one of the few Black people on the board because I told them, like, I'm not going to be a token. I have opinions. I'm going to, I'm going to call things out as I see it. And I appreciate them actually doing the work and committing to those tough conversations, those challenges, and trying to, right? Who's at the table, who's not at the table, go get them and invite them and ask them, what do you need at the table? Marginalized causes and things like that, they need more support to get those same things accomplished. How can we collaborate versus, oh, it's Black History Month. Can you come and say a few words? we give you a Snicker bar. And you have to kind of discern those things. And sometimes I have to make sure, because sometimes people see the things that you're doing and I get invited to things. And I've had this happen, like, oh, wow, they see me, they, want me there. And then I'm like, oh, wait a minute. They wasn't inviting me. They were inviting all the things that I represent. And that's not a good feeling. No one wants to be used. And if you can't do something about it, but you got money, you could fund someone who could do something about it. If you got time, you could volunteer and do something about it. You could give an idea.
One of the ways you're doing that is with your organization, What's Your Elephant? And I remember when I first saw that, I was like, oh, that title or that name really intrigues me. Can you share about the organization?
Yeah, so What's Your Elephant is an arts and education nonprofit. It's a movement that started actually in 2013. It's a nonprofit since last year, but it uses the arts to create a safe space to address unspoken topics. So elephant in the room topics. So we cover things from trauma, mental health, healing, LGBT issues, social justice, racial justice, using the arts as a catalyst to talk about these things, right? So, we can't figure out the solution for a problem if we don't even know and have awareness around what the problem is and all the pieces. There's some things people are uncomfortable talking about. For myself, What's Your Elephant grew out of me being a survivor. I had a very challenging childhood and a survivor of trauma and sexual abuse and different things. Even though I've always done art, it started coming out in my art, some of the things that I've gone through. And when I shared about it, people were like, oh my gosh. Like I have a video and that I did many years ago. It was talking about an abusive situation. When I had that in an installation in an art exhibit and people saw it, they either wanted to come and to A, hug me, or B, hug me and say, since you shared that, this is what I need to share, right? And realizing that there's a need for people to share things we don't share it because we feel we're the only ones going through it. There's shame around it. And even some of the microaggressions as it relates to race and gender and all these things that we can't share about it, right? So if we can try to open up and share these things, that's actually a bridge to community. This is what I did, or this is what helped me. One of the things I said many years ago in one of the earlier workshops is, I forget the lady's name, the Black lady on Star Trek.
Nichelle, is it Nichelle?
So one of the stories that just stuck with me and always gives me goosebumps, right? So she was the Black lady on Star Trek, and she at some point was going to leave Star Trek because she felt like she's just sitting behind this one spot, people just see in the back of her head. She told somebody she's thinking about leaving Star Trek. That somebody told somebody that told somebody that told a Star Trek fan who came to her, who happened to be Martin Luther King. And he said, you represent something so big. You're a Black person on TV. Martin Luther King had a conversation with her and basically told her not to leave Star Trek. That for the first time, there's a Black person on TV that's not a mammy, a nanny, a drug addict. So that's the power of sharing, because if she held that, she could have just left and kept it going and never said nothing to anyone. And look at her legacy that she left behind. Sometimes you might not be comfortable starting a conversation, but you could write a poem, you could write a song, you could do a collage. As artists, right? Part of our job, part of the things that we do is to talk about what's going on and the things that people can't put into words, right? The arts is powerful. What's Your Elephant is highlighting how powerful art can be as a tool, as a community builder, as getting to know people, as, you know, having a judgment-free zone to talk about whatever those things are. So What's Your Elephant? We have art exhibitions. Sometimes the call is any elephant in the room topic, and sometimes it's specific. Recently, I did an exhibition with a partnership with the Children's Services in Broward County, art around the impact of the Baker Act to children and families. So that Baker Act is when someone's having a mental health crisis and they have to come and remove them and put them in isolation. And it could happen to anyone at any age, but they did a study looking at it, the impact of when it happens to children and some of the traumas around that, right? And I created an art show and a program and an opening and workshops and talks around that impact. There's adults who had trauma in their childhood from being removed from their home or removed from school or removed from somewhere and put in isolation 10 to 48 hours. Art is advocacy. You know, which protests don't have a poster? Even before I went to therapy, realizing, oh, wow, when I was going through traumatic times, when I look back and I'm like, oh, but I had this book with all these poems and short stories and sketches. That was a healing mechanism. That was a coping mechanism. We create the art and then we sit down and we talk about it. I partner with different organizations. I go into schools. I do them independently, or sometimes other organizations or nonprofits may want to partner with me to create, a conversation and using art and showcasing it.
I know you're using your abilities as a creative person, but professionally or educationally, do you have a background in psychology or mental health? Because that's huge.
When I do my workshops, I do emphasize I am not a therapist. Now, I've always gotten feedback where people have told me that they felt comfortable telling me things. Like, I'm not judging them. Like, I had a friend one time and she was just like, some people, they may only talk to you if they think that you have certain status. But she was just like, when you talk to people, people feel heard and seen. It's just different things that I've gathered in my journey of life and in things that I've been drawn to and I learn. Sometimes I do partner with mental health counselors to have them there, because when you tell people like no judgment zone, some people really go in. I remember I did a workshop several years ago. This 72-year-old lady came to the workshop. She didn't know anything that I was doing. She never heard about me. She said her friend saw an advertisement on social media. Afterwards, people are invited to share. They're not forced to share, but they're invited to share. And then we're listening. We're not trying to solve. When it got to her turn to share her artwork, what led her to create the art, she shared with us that she was sexually abused by both of her parents. She never told anybody until that day. She was carrying this around for 60, 70 years, and even with kids. I was doing this art class and it was children with different disabilities. I usually start the class by asking them about the last class, right? So this particular time, they were sluggish. They were like, not really say anything. I said, you know what? Y'all too young for coffee, so let's get up and move, right? And I got them shaking and jumping. And of course, they're being silly, so they love it. And literally seconds after they sat down and I asked questions, the answers were coming to them, right? Just doing different things where I just bring in those practices or having resources. Sometimes people send me messages. One person I knew, she said, I didn't go through the trauma that you went through, so my thing is not that deep. Like 2 incidents where she had a stepfather that attempted to sexually abuse her. And I had to tell her, like, first of all, there's no award to whose trauma is bigger, right? Trauma is trauma. Someone doesn't have to succeed in something for you to be traumatized by it. When you go through something, it stores in your body. So sometimes people think like, I survived this, I moved past it, I don't want to deal with it. It's yours until you deal with it, until you process it. And so those are things that I kind of bring into the workshops, the talks, the conversations. This guy is a friend and mentor. He came to one of my workshops. He didn't participate, but he said, I just want to support you in your first workshop, whatever. So I just was there. He came to me weeks later. You healed me, right? And I was like, what? I sat through everybody else's participation of the workshop. When I got home, there's something that kind of clicked in my head. Now, this is a person who is like going on 70. He said that what came up for him is that even though he's gone through therapy, something in that workshop clicked for me where I went back and realized when I was at a summer camp at 12 years old that one of the counselors sexually abused me. And so he just felt like, okay, what would Niki do? And I was like, oh gosh. He actually found the summer camp, reached out to the police department of that neighborhood and said, hey, I know nothing could happen. This is so many years ago, but I just wanted to tell you what happened to me 60 years ago. And so the chief of police contacted him. I just want to let you know that that person ended up in jail anyway for something else. I mean, now this is not saying that this happens to everybody, right? But it's just people who shared a significant impact of the workshop. And so to me, that's like the power of art.
Just witnessing the workshop, I just visually just see all this unlocking of memories and more than anything, emotions. What you're doing, how I got back into writing was several years ago. A friend started a group in LA called The Missing Piece, a memoir writing group. How you describe it is so similar to my experiences once I got going in that this period of my life in my 20s, I just broke down something that me in my everyday life wouldn't do. But what you're doing with that, I just thought of that. And again, how powerful that is. Now, so you're based in Florida. Maybe this is a capitalist way of thinking of this, but would you ever take this out of Florida and find ways to make it spread nationally?
Oh, absolutely. I'm definitely interested in finding people that want to grow with What's Your Elephant and feel like, hey, I want to be a part of it. What can I do? I mean, I have people that come through, like if I have a big exhibition, I oftentimes collaborate with a lot of local people, independent people, but I am hoping to grow it to a point where that it can, go worldwide or where it's needed and bring versions of it to different places. Several years ago, there was a group that was started Montego Bay Pride, right? There's a Kingston Pride in Jamaica, and Jamaica is, known for its homophobia. The thing is, it also becomes a class and, thing because like for the upper class, uptown people, it's actually more acceptable in some instances. There was a man who was a lawyer, I can't remember his name offhand, but he was fighting the buggery law over there in Jamaica that impacts gay men in particular. I went the first year, flew in to support that. And then in talking and telling him what I was doing with What's Your Elephant, he was just like, I would love for you to do something with Montego Bay Pride. So the second year when I went, I did a workshop in Jamaica, getting them resources. So I did an art making workshop, but I would love to go like different places. When do people not need to be able to talk about things? Because even many years ago, me and a few other artists, we did Artists for Black Lives Matter, and we had people contributing 12 by 12 pieces of art, no matter your artistic ability, on what does Black Lives Matter mean to you, and creating a space to address any loss of life due to injustice, racial justice. And it was also pro LGBT, pro women's rights. And then we were going to do a silent, like a peaceful protest where we left these pieces all around South Beach during Art Basel. Like we're in Art Basel now, where it's like millions of people come down to buy art. It's like the biggest art fair in the US. When we put out the call to artists, we were getting pieces from Switzerland. And we're like, we can't send this back to you. We're just like a couple of artists doing some things over here. And they're like, no, we want to be a part of it. And oftentimes when I do the What's Your Elephant exhibitions, I still create a space to show some of that work. So I definitely would love to travel with it, find other people who want to be a part and grow it or bring me to different places. I definitely have a passport. So now, it does take money to like create programs and travel and do all these things, but I don't do these things to get paid. I do these things because they're important, whether I have money or not. Seeing other people in different lights. When my son was in the third grade, the teacher found out I was an artist and she asked me to do an art thing with them. So I was just starting with What's Your Elephant, doing the workshop. So I was like, I'll just do an art making workshop with What's Your Elephant. Of course, it's always appropriate for whatever age group, creating a space where we're going to talk about different things. So we did the art piece. We talked about it. They loved it. My son's in fourth grade. Similar thing happened. I got called for something and the teacher said, oh, you do art? A lot of them remembered me from the year before. And they were like, yes, so excited. So she said as a treat, she would wait to the end of the school year after testing to have me come in and do an art program with them. So when I came in and I did the workshop, they did some paintings and they're talking about these things. Like there's one kid, he was talking about he was depressed. His parents were going through a divorce. And so the teacher told me, had I known the impact of this workshop, I should have had you come at the beginning of the school year. I was with these kids a whole year and I learned so much from you being here for 2 hours. That's a very long way of saying, absolutely, I want to do it in different places. So,
But even just that, I'm conscious of the secrets that, say, I could keep as an adult. The teacher not knowing a whole year what her students are going through, how as young as that age or younger, how we start the habit of keeping things to ourselves and not sharing about it.
Absolutely. It starts so young. There was this other group of kids. They were kids that were in foster care. There was an organization that deals with kids with foster care, so they brought them in. One of the girls, when she started talking about her piece, she created a piece that was about missing her father. The kids were like, wait a minute, we thought you hate your father. You're always talking about you hate your father. This gave us space to talk about both statements could be true. You could love and hate someone. You have to have a certain amount of love or disappointment to hate somebody in the first place, right? And this other boy, he started cutting the paper in these boxes. I said, no, don't cut it. We're making a collage piece. And so I was like, you know what? Let me let him go. He cut up his paper and he folded them in. As he talked, he opened each one and it had different stories. His parents were going through a divorce. And these are some of the challenges. Children have feelings too, like old school. What do you have to cry about? What do you got to be depressed about, right? That's what old school people tell children, right? So giving that space of what's going on with you and that it's okay for you to be upset. And those are human feelings and it's okay to have those things.
Very much that. Yeah, I can definitely relate to that when I did therapy the second time when my mother passed in 2004, and exactly that statement of saying I could love this person and hate them just as intensely. In a lot of ways, what I got from it at that time was it was a release. One of the other ways that I discovered that you are making a positive difference is recently the IG live chat you did by Narisa Streetmost, where I love this title, Decolonizing Your Eyes.
Oh, yes.
Can you explain about that?
Yeah, so that was kind of going back to a little bit what I was saying earlier about being intentional. For example, diversity and inclusion. And so I do graphic design. She had another lady that does typography and someone else talking about the disparities. For example, most of the people that does typography, not even 1% are Black. But we're talking about being intentional with everything. You're doing a program and you need a flyer. Is there a way for you to look at a Black and brown person that also does graphic design that makes the fonts? Or let's say with images again, right? We talked about like if you go to stock photography, most of them, you'll be hard pressed to find a Black person. I think it's nappy.co is one of the stock photography that I came across many years ago that is dedicated to Black people. Because sometimes you're looking for content to create your work with. But if you don't see that in the normal stock photographies, if you look at Instagram, you look for swimmers, mermaids, you see white people. So it disrupts the norm when you see a Black person in the water on Instagram. But it's important, and it's also helping to decolonize what's normal for people. There was this group that I met, Afro Mermaids. She started Afro Mermaids because she started getting into swimming and she had a thing for mermaids. So she was at this mermaid shop. She realized in the entire store, there was not one Black mermaid. She goes and research, and surprise, surprise, the earliest mermaid stories is in Africa with, Mami Wata. But that's like with everything else, right? But that's what we're talking about, how you could create diversity and inclusion with design, like how we could be intentional with our designs. If I need to buy something or I need a service, if I have money to spend, I'm first thinking of, do I know someone who's of any of the marginalized groups? Is there someone that is not normally represented in that space that I could give my money to before just like heading to Walmart? Before you give your time, think of, can you use that as a form of creating some equity, creating some upliftment for another marginalized group who's not normally seen there? And sometimes people say, well, if white people did that, like white people do that. That's the norm.
Okay.
That is the point, right? Because it was this Black Jamaican poet, and I forgot his name offhand right now. And he was saying, and this is the power of images and why representation matters, all of those things. He said, you don't have to be Christian. You don't have to be Muslim or Jew. You could be a Pan-African. The moment someone says Jesus, 9 out of 10, that first image is the blonde hair, blue-eyed, white-skinned Jesus. And that's the power of images. That's why this type of work is important. You're programmed by the things you see, whether you want it or not.
I did graphic design for years, and fonts are emotional. They're part of the creative process, the piece. And never thinking, how would a Black person or person of color design a font that would evoke a certain emotion that I could use for this particular piece? I never thought of it that way. Or just the images. Yeah. Going on sites. And again, that's another game I play when I'm looking up images. It's like, I type in Black graphic designer woman, type it in. No, that's not what I need.
Yeah.
Or it just doesn't even come up.
It doesn't come up.
Yeah.
And it's also important, especially in the age where we're getting into AI, the racism that's inherent with the people that's programming it is there too. Let's say there was a site and it was giving different words. Like, let's say if you put a criminal and they were pulling up Black images, they were creating Black images. There's human beings creating this. So if there's disparity in the world in terms of representation, and now those same people are creating advanced technology, Now that advanced technology is flawed too, unless we step up to the plate to say, let's make sure we could fix this. And I think there was a lady in Google that ended up getting fired because she was bringing up those points. And that's just how our society is, because the majority of people that's been controlling media are, those people and those stories. It's always going to be important for us to keep advocating for marginalized people. There's only one side of the story that's being shared. And I remember years ago when I was in college, there was some creative class I was taking, and she talked about how it's not just about you as a graphic designer. Your stories, if you're able to tap into you specifically and put that into your work, that's going to be the difference between you and I if both of us are graphic designers. And you're able to tap into some of your history, some of your culture, some of your this, some of your that. That's going to differentiate you from a world of graphic designers. And that's a superpower.
Or that what we're seeing is based on that person of color, because I see that now in these high-end brands, and they have the disco music playing and the person dancing. I was like, that's from the 70s. The movement, the person, even the way they look. I was like, that's images from the 70s. But now it's being used by this organization as considered high art when it, in its original form, it wasn't considered that. If it's okay, I just have two more questions.
Sure.
One of them connected to, being Afro-Latina, and I, looked up stats, and 12% in the US are in Florida. If you could just share with those who may not be familiar what it means to be Afro-Latina.
Oh man, okay. It's a journey for me. Again, it goes back to representation and advocacy, right? And because I'm first generation American, so I have Panama, Cuba, Jamaica. I have Cubans on both sides. Now, my mom's side speaks Spanish, but for whatever reason, when they came over to the country, and a lot of Latin people do this, right? They try to be American. They spoke Spanish, but they spoke to us in English when in school. So for me, my mom said that she was waiting till I got to an age that she could teach me Spanish. She didn't think about she should just talk Spanish, right? So when a child is growing up in a multilingual household, they may start speaking a little later, but then they have two languages. She's trying to teach me Spanish. I'm a smart mouth kid. She got discouraged and she just never kept up with it. Growing up in the 80s and you're brown skin and don't speak Spanish and all those things. And I was in New York at the time. And back then, there was no representation of Afro-Latinas in the media. Even now, still, novellas is mostly light-skinned, straight hair, Latin people. There were times where I didn't even want to say that I'm Latin. I couldn't be Latin if I don't speak Spanish, or people don't assume that I'm Latin because I'm brown skinned. If that's a part of my heritage and culture, it's mine to embrace and to uphold. And it's not about what someone else accepts me as. It's about who I accept me as. Or sometimes I throw people off like, my mom's side speaks Spanish, but I grew up speaking Arabic and Hebrew. And they're like, what? And I said, yeah, it's a long story. The thing is, there were parts of my life where I didn't really embrace it as much because when people see me, they just see a Black person. And so I started to learn to embrace that and lead with that. Like, it's important for me to say Afro-Latina. And especially like in Florida, Miami, it's so frustrating because you get other Latin people and they're like, oh, so who in your family married a Latin person? Now I'm like, don't act like we don't come in these shades. We come in all the shades. Now I know your country might have killed us all off because we're in this shade, right? Because there's a lot of countries, Argentina was killing their Black people. Some countries had the brown paper test, or Brazil, where they had Africans going there, but for them, they want to help their race by marrying lighter and lighter people, right? Because it's this idolizing, this proximity to whiteness. For me, it just became another thing of like, yes, I'm brown skinned. No, I don't speak Spanish. And that's okay. Because here's the thing, like there's so many other Latin people that don't speak Spanish. At some point, I do want to be intentional and learn it because that is a part of my heritage and right if I choose to. So for me, it's important to say Afro-Latina. So people have to acknowledge my hair is thick, my skin is brown, I don't speak Spanish. You goddamn right, I'm Latin. Yep. and challenging Latin people and Black people. Because sometimes people are like, oh, you think you're different. But like, no, it's just like, that's a part of my heritage. And you even get that in queer spaces where it's like, are you Black or are you gay? People want to like piecemeal you, right? And it's just like, I'm all of those things. I had a friend said, oh, do you identify as Black? And I was just like, you know what? What? It's sometimes challenges, right? Because there's also challenges between the different Black communities, like African American versus Caribbean Black versus the Latin, and then the Latin Blacks. And there's some Latin people that despises the fact that if they're pulled over and get a ticket and they could be as brown as me, the policeman is checking off white. And they're, what? I'm Honduras. Like there's some Cubans, color of my shirt, like, oh no, I'm not Black, I'm Cuban. Or some countries where they feel like, oh, we don't have racism. It's like, oh yeah, you have colorism, pelo malo, bad hair, good hair. Nowadays, now it's more accepted to be Afro-Latina or a brown skinned person calling themselves Latin. But, also part of me is wanting to take up as much space as possible, right? Because the more I am fully who I am, I not only empower myself, I empower other people around me. We owe it to ourselves while we're still breathing to really get to know ourselves fully, to embrace ourselves fully, the good, the bad, the ugly, all the broken parts, the good parts, the things we love, the things we're ashamed, because that's when we become fully who we are and more powerful. And I feel like the more I embrace more of me, it impacts everything around me, like my work. Like there's things in my work that I feel some of my success has been because I've taken more ownership of who I am. Like being a queer person and having a kid. And when I was younger, I don't like labels, right? And then feeling like, okay, well, I'll say bisexual because if I'm with guys, feeling like I can't say lesbian because I have a kid versus who do I feel I am? What resonates with me? I'm Black and I'm Latin, right? And I could say Latin and not say the Black. And I could say Black and not say the Latin. I don't care if you accept it. I accept it for myself and I'm proud of it. And it still goes back to representation, right? Because just knowing some of the things I struggled with in growing up, I feel like if I could be a space for another young person who might be in my shoes, struggling with their identity, struggling with who they are, growing up in America, but your whole family's not American, so you have the African Americans who feel like, oh, you think you're better than us. Your family who's just like, oh, you're American as an insult. And so it's just like really finding your own way in your own space and just like, you know what, tune out all the noises. Who am I? To me, you either respect it or you don't.
I know you do public speaking, but have you ever been approached or thought about doing a TEDx talk?
The small TEDx are supposed to be 15 minutes and I'm a little chatty at times. A couple of years ago, one of my art shows, some lady who've come to all of my art shows, I've been doing art shows since 2008. She came to one of the art shows and she was just like, it's so interesting and I love to see you grow. There's people like, oh yeah, I know Niki Lopez. And I'm just sitting in front of them. They didn't know who I was because I was just like so in the background, like, oh, that's not me. But also, again, part of that journey of embracing myself and taking ownership of the things that I'm creating and all that has been a part of my journey. And so she had shared with me that she remembers when I was first taking the mic, that I was so uncomfortable and you could tell, like, get me off the stage. It was a journey for me to be like, finding my voice and being comfortable. And, some people are very like charismatic and blah, blah. And I'm like, oh, that's not me. So maybe I'm not a speaker. Actually, no, I'm a speaker in my own way and people resonate with me in the way that I talk. And I don't have to compare myself to someone else. All the work that I do is like intrinsically tied into my personal work and journey. Sometimes I tell people that I'm shy. They're like, I'm like, I am. I'm shy at times. I can be socially awkward at times, or I guess it depends, right? Because I don't really do a lot of small talk, but then someone talks about something deep and it's just like, yes, we got to fight this.
I'm learning that those are the traits of, and my perception of that is that being the observers, like you were saying, in the beginning of your evolution, maybe in the background, but we're always watching, we're always looking, always observing, and shared several times, like, how can we make this better? I always end with asking if you have any final thoughts or insights.
My final thoughts is for people to keep creating and exploring and challenging and not feeling that they have to accept anything that people are giving to them, taking ownership of who we are, doing what we can to make a difference. Everything matters, right? A bunch of ripples makes a big wave. Sometimes I feel people may not make a move because they feel it's not significant enough, or they're not significant enough, or they don't have certain resources. Everybody who's breathing, who's born on this world, you have a purpose. You have the capacity to create change, big and small, and it inspires other people around you. You don't have to be an artist or professional artist to create. And I just want to see more people be more creative.
Thank you for that. How can people interact with you or contact you online?
I have two websites. I have nikilopez.art, nikilopez.art. I also have a website for my nonprofit, whatsyourelephant.org. Instagram, I'm Niki Lopez 19. I'm also What's Your Elephant, and then my design company is Niki Lopez Creative. Spell Niki with 1K. LinkedIn, TikTok, Facebook, Instagram. Now there's Blue Sky. Yeah, I feel like social media is another leg to community and our advocacy work. So it's just like, I love people to come to my events, but also connect with me online and build and share. And I love learning about different things that people are doing, as well as sharing what I'm doing.
Thank you for spending time with us. If you enjoyed this episode, please rate, comment, and subscribe. Share with your friends too. You can also follow us on Instagram at Our Black Gay Diaspora and on Twitter at BLK Gay Diaspora. Until next time.